Welcome to this remarkable war survival chronicle, where forgotten civilian wisdom met the collapse of armies and nations. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're listening from, and the exact time this story found you. These quiet war stories often travel farther than battles ever did. In the spring of 1946, a classified advertisement appeared in the Millfield County Gazette. War damage farm, 47 acres, structures partially intact, $10 cash only. Buyer assumes all risks. The advertisement ran for 3 consecutive weeks. Only one person responded. Her name was Cordelia Thorne, and she was 28 years old. The farm had been abandoned since a military training accident in 1944 had destroyed the main house and most of the outbuildings. What Cordelia found there would test every survival principle she had learned during the hardest years of the war. The story of Cordelia's purchase and subsequent survival on the Brennan farm was discovered in 1967 when the Millfield County Historical Society received a donation of documents from the estate of Dr. Phineas Caldwell, the local physician who had attended the area from 1940 to 1965. Among his papers were detailed medical records, personal correspondence, and a series of handwritten journals that documented civilian survival techniques during the immediate post-war period. These documents, archived on microfilm and stored in the basement of the county courthouse, had never been digitized. They remained largely unexamined until a graduate student researching rural medicine found them during a routine survey of county records. According to Dr. Caldwell's notes, dated April 15, 1946, Cordelia arrived at his office on a Tuesday morning, carrying a canvas bag and wearing a wool coat that had been mended several times. She requested tetanus vaccination and asked about winter medical supplies. Patient shows signs of long-term malnutrition, but is alert and methodical. Inquired specifically about treating pneumonia without hospital access. Left detailed instructions for emergency medical procedures. The doctor charged her 50 cents. She paid an exact change. The Brennan farm sat 3 miles from the nearest neighbor and 7 miles from town. The military accident had left the main farmhouse with its roof partially collapsed and windows blown out. The barn had lost its north wall. A smaller outbuilding, originally used for storing feed, remained structurally sound, but had no insulation or heating system. This became Cordelia's initial shelter. County records show the property had no electrical service, and the well pump had been damaged beyond repair. The previous owners had evacuated immediately after the accident and never returned. Dr. Caldwell's journal entries from the summer of 1946 describe his occasional visits to check on the widow at the old Brennan place. His notes reveal a systematic approach to survival that contradicted every assumption about desperation and improvisation. Cordelia had divided her time between 3 primary activities: structural repairs using salvaged materials, food preservation without refrigeration, and stockpiling supplies for the coming winter. She had identified every usable piece of lumber, metal, and fabric within a 2-mile radius of the farm. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was left to chance. The feed storage building measured 12 feet by 16 feet with walls of unpainted pine boards. Cordelia had sealed the gaps between boards using a mixture of clay and chopped straw. She installed a small wood-burning stove fashioned from a steel drum salvaged from the damaged barn. The chimney pipe, assembled from sections found in various outbuildings, extended through a reinforced opening in the roof. For insulation, she had gathered milkweed down, cattail fluff, and wool scraps, stuffing them between inner and outer layers of salvaged canvas. The result was a space that could maintain a temperature 30 degrees warmer than the outside air, using less than 5 pounds of wood per day. Water presented the most serious challenge. The damaged well pump could not be repaired without parts that were unavailable in 1946. Cordelia constructed a hand-operated bucket system using rope and pulleys salvaged from the barn. She dug shallow collection pools to capture rainwater and built a simple filtration system using sand, charcoal, and cloth. Dr. Caldwell noted that she never suffered from waterborne illness despite relying entirely on untreated sources. Patient demonstrates unusual knowledge of water purification techniques, claims to have learned from Army manual discarded at rail station. Food storage without refrigeration required knowledge that few civilians possessed in 1946. Cordelia had constructed root cellars in 3 separate locations, each designed for different types of preservation. The main cellar, dug into the hillside behind the ruined house, maintained a constant temperature of 45 degrees. Here, she stored potatoes, turnips, and apples wrapped individually in newspaper. A smaller cellar near the creek stayed consistently cool and humid, perfect for cabbage and other vegetables that required moisture. The third storage area, built above ground but heavily insulated, was used for drying meat and vegetables during the warmer months. But what few knew that first autumn was that Cordelia had been calculating supplies not just for survival, but for something far more demanding. She had studied weather records from the county courthouse dating back 20 years. She understood that severe winters arrived in cycles, and 1946 was positioned to be exceptional. While other residents hoped for a mild season, Cordelia prepared for temperatures that might drop below zero for extended periods. Her calculations proved accurate. The winter of 1946-1947 became the harshest in regional memory. Dr. Caldwell described temperatures dropping to 15 below zero for 6 consecutive days in January. Snow accumulated to depths of 4 feet. No vehicles could reach the farm for 3 weeks. The telephone lines, already unreliable, failed completely during the second week of the cold spell. Cordelia had prepared for exactly this scenario. She had stockpiled 18 cords of seasoned hardwood, 50 pounds of dried beans, 40 pounds of salt-preserved meat, and enough lamp oil to provide light for 2 hours each evening through the darkest months. But the true test of her preparation came not from the weather, but from an unexpected moral challenge that would define the difference between individual survival and community survival. On January 23, 1947, Dr. Caldwell received an unexpected visitor. A man named Marcus Holloway, recently discharged from the Pacific Theater, had been walking from the rail station to his family's farm when the blizzard struck. Holloway later described stumbling through the snow for hours before seeing a faint light in the distance. He followed it to Cordelia's shelter, where she found him collapsed beside her door, suffering from severe hypothermia and frostbite on both feet. Without access to a hospital, telephone, or even a neighbor within walking distance, Cordelia faced a decision that would test every principle of wartime survival. Treating Holloway would consume precious medical supplies she had carefully rationed for herself. Feeding him would strain food reserves calculated down to the pound. Heating additional space would require burning wood she had measured against the remaining weeks of winter. Yet the alternative was allowing a fellow veteran to die within yards of safety. According to Holloway's account, recorded in Dr. Caldwell's files, Cordelia brought him inside and began treatment immediately. She had prepared for medical emergencies by studying the contents of a military first aid manual and stockpiling basic supplies. She treated his hypothermia by gradually warming his core temperature while keeping his extremities cool, preventing the dangerous rush of cold blood to his heart. For the frostbite, she used a technique involving alternating warm and cool compresses, preventing tissue damage while restoring circulation. Holloway remained at the farm for 11 days until the roads were passable enough for Dr. Caldwell to reach them. The decision to shelter Holloway had cost Cordelia approximately 1/3 of her winter food supply and most of her medical stores. But her preparation had accounted for exactly this type of emergency. She had calculated her supplies not just for her own survival, but for the possibility that others might require assistance. Dr. Caldwell noted, "Patient shows remarkable foresight in planning for contingencies beyond personal need. This level of preparation suggests military or institutional training, though patient claims no formal instruction. No radio, no telephone, no neighbors for miles. Yet somehow word of Cordelia's capabilities spread through the region like smoke signals across a vast landscape. Dr. Caldwell's records show that over the next 2 years, she provided temporary shelter for 6 other people. 2 soldiers returning from overseas, a family whose house had burned, and 3 individuals caught by severe weather while traveling. She never turned anyone away. She never asked for payment. She simply calculated the additional resources required and adjusted her stockpiles accordingly. Patient operates an unofficial relief station," Dr. Caldwell wrote in his journal. "Community has come to depend on her availability during emergencies. Remarkable that someone with no official training or resources has become the de facto emergency coordinator for a 15-mile radius." The investigation into Cordelia's background, conducted by the Historical Society in 1967, revealed information that had been omitted from earlier records. According to documents found in the Veterans Administration files in 1963, Cordelia had been married to Sergeant Raymond Thorne, who was killed in action in the European theater in December 1944. She had received no pension due to administrative complications involving his service record. The $10 she used to purchase the farm represented her entire savings from 18 months of work at a munitions factory. She had chosen the damaged property not from desperation, but because she understood that successful survival required starting with realistic expectations rather than optimistic assumptions. While other war widows had used their savings to rent apartments in town or move back with family, Cordelia had calculated that independence required controlling every variable that might affect her survival. A damaged farm could be repaired. An isolated location meant fewer people competing for limited resources. A low purchase price meant money remaining for essential supplies. The spring of 1947 brought validation of Cordelia's methods, but also revealed the true scope of her planning. Dr. Caldwell's notes from April describe visiting the farm to find Cordelia teaching a group of neighbors the preservation techniques she had developed over the winter. Patient has established informal classes in food storage, water management, and basic medical procedures. Attendance includes families from as far as 12 miles away. Knowledge being passed appears to be comprehensive and practical. These informal teaching sessions continued throughout 1947 and 1948. Cordelia had recognized that her survival techniques would only remain effective if the broader community also became more resilient. A region filled with unprepared neighbors would inevitably create demands that no individual could meet, but a community where each household could manage its own emergencies would strengthen everyone's chances during future crises. Dr. Caldwell recorded detailed descriptions of Cordelia's teaching methods. She demonstrated food preservation by working alongside participants, ensuring they understood not just the procedures, but the principles behind them. She explained water management by having them construct their own filtration systems using materials they could find on their properties. She taught medical procedures by using scenarios based on common emergencies, focusing on treatments that required no specialized equipment. Patient's approach to instruction is methodical and practical, Dr. Caldwell noted. She avoids theoretical discussions and focuses exclusively on techniques that can be implemented immediately. Students leave with specific knowledge they can apply the same day. But perhaps most significantly, Cordelia taught the moral framework that governed her decisions about helping others. She explained how to calculate resources not just for individual survival, but for the inevitable emergencies that would require assistance to neighbors. She demonstrated how proper preparation could create capacity for generosity rather than forcing choices between self-preservation and community obligation. Dr. Caldwell's final entry regarding Cordelia was dated September 12, 1949. Patient has decided to sell the farm and relocate to Oregon. New owners are a young family who have been learning her survival techniques over the past 6 months. Patient spent considerable time teaching them food preservation, water management, and emergency medical procedures. Community will be significantly less prepared for crisis without her presence. The sale documents, discovered in the county records, show that Cordelia sold the farm for $850, an amount that reflected the improvements she had made to the property over 3.5 years, the structures she had repaired and winterized, the root cellars and storage systems she had constructed, the well system she had modified to operate without mechanical pumps, the cleared fields and established vegetable gardens. The property that had been worth $10 as damaged land was now a functioning farm capable of supporting a family through extended isolation. The new owners, identified as Daniel and Ruth Ashford, maintained detailed records of their own survival experiences during the severe winter of 1950-1951. Their journals, donated to the Historical Society in 1969, credit Cordelia's training with their ability to survive a week-long power outage that affected the entire region. Mrs. Thorne taught us that survival depends not on hoping for the best, but on preparing for the worst, Ruth Ashford wrote. She showed us that every decision must account for the possibility that help might not arrive. Further research revealed that Cordelia's techniques had been passed down through multiple families in the area. A 1965 survey conducted by the County Extension Office found that households within a 15-mile radius of the former Brennan farm had significantly higher rates of food preservation knowledge, emergency medical training, and winter preparedness compared to similar communities elsewhere in the state. The survey noted an unusual culture of mutual assistance and practical preparation, but did not identify its origin. The connection to Cordelia's 3-year residence was not established until the Historical Society's research in 1967. The final piece of Cordelia's story was discovered in a trunk of personal effects found in the attic of Dr. Caldwell's former office building. Among the items was a letter from Cordelia to Dr. Caldwell, dated August 1949, which had apparently never been mailed. The letter read, in part, "Doctor, you asked me once where I learned to prepare for hardship. The truth is that war teaches you to expect the worst while hoping for survival. But what war does not teach is how to help others survive alongside you. That lesson comes from understanding that your own survival depends ultimately on the survival of your community." The letter continued, "I learned this during my first winter on the farm, when I realized that no amount of individual preparation would be sufficient if everyone around me remained unprepared. A community of desperate people will eventually overwhelm any individual's resources, but a community of prepared people creates security that no individual could achieve alone." Cordelia's legacy extended far beyond the documented families who received her training. Dr. Caldwell's successor, Dr. Margaret Sinclair, noted in her 1952 annual report to the County Health Department that emergency room visits during severe weather had declined significantly compared to previous years. Community members appear better prepared to handle medical emergencies without professional intervention. Basic treatment knowledge seems unusually widespread for a rural area. A 1963 study by the State Agricultural Extension Service identified the former Brennan Farm area as having the lowest rates of winter livestock loss in the region. Farmers interviewed for the study credited techniques they had learned from a woman who lived on the old damaged farm, but few remembered her name. The techniques themselves had become so thoroughly integrated into local practice that their origin had been forgotten, even as their effectiveness continued to protect families and livestock through harsh seasons. The abandoned military installation that had originally caused the damage to the Brennan farm was converted to a civilian training facility in 1955. Instructors at the facility noted that local residents who participated in emergency preparedness courses already possessed knowledge and skills typically found only among military personnel. The source of this preparation was never officially investigated, but course records show consistently higher performance among participants from the Millfield County area. In 1961, a severe ice storm left most of the county without power for 2 weeks. Emergency services were overwhelmed, and state assistance was delayed by dangerous travel conditions. Yet casualty rates in the former Brennan Farm area were significantly lower than in other parts of the county. Red Cross workers noted that families in this region seemed unusually well prepared for extended isolation, with adequate food storage, alternative heating methods, and medical supplies. The final documentation of Cordelia's influence was found in a 1968 interview with Reverend Isaiah Whitmore, who had served the Millfield County churches from 1940 to 1965. When asked about community changes during the post-war period, Reverend Whitmore said, "There was a woman who lived alone on that damaged farm for a few years after the war. She taught people to prepare for hardship without losing hope, to help others without depleting themselves. I never knew her well, but I saw how the community changed after she arrived. People became more capable, more generous, more realistic about what they might face, but also more confident about their ability to handle it." The Historical Society's research concluded that Cordelia Thorne had created a model of civilian preparedness that prioritized community resilience over individual survival. Her approach combined practical skills with moral principles, ensuring that preparation strengthened rather than threatened social bonds. She demonstrated that true survival depends not on hoarding resources, but on building capacity to share them effectively. The county records show no further mention of Cordelia after her departure for Oregon in 1949. Attempts to trace her subsequent life through Pacific Northwest archives have been unsuccessful. She left behind no family, no official positions, no public recognition. Yet her influence persisted in the prepared communities, the preserved knowledge, and the lives saved by techniques she had developed and shared during 3 years on a damaged farm purchased for $10. Dr. Caldwell's final journal entry about the broader implications of his interactions with Cordelia, dated December 1949, provides perhaps the most accurate assessment of her legacy. Patient represented an approach to survival that contradicts most assumptions about crisis response. Rather than focusing on individual preservation, she built systems that enhanced community capacity. Rather than hoarding resources, she created abundance through efficiency and planning. Rather than avoiding risk, she prepared to manage it effectively. Her method suggests that the difference between surviving and thriving during hardship may depend less on what you store than on what you know, and less on what you know than on what you teach others. This concludes the documentary evidence available regarding Cordelia Thorne and her time at the Brennan Farm. The records suggest that her approach to survival during the challenging post-war period created lasting benefits for the community she served. Her story demonstrates that individual preparation and community assistance need not conflict, but can instead reinforce each other when guided by realistic planning and moral clarity about our obligations to fellow survivors.